Okay, so after weeks of gridlock, the government is finally reopening. But how? How did they break the deadlock? Well, let's dive in and break down the deal that actually ended this shutdown.
40 days. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how long the government was partially shut down. I mean, we're talking about a really prolonged, tense standoff that hit federal workers and government services all across the country.
But yeah, after all that time, we finally have our headline. A deal has been reached. Lawmakers have found a way forward, a path to get the lights back on. So the big question is, how'd they do it? How did they actually pull this off?
Well, you might think the breakthrough came from the usual big names, the party leaders. But no, this agreement was carefully put together by a small, bipartisan group of senators who were working behind the scenes. So this whole effort was really spearheaded by Republican Senator Susan Collins from Maine. But here's the crucial part. She built this coalition with Democrats and an independent from nearby New England states. This regional bipartisan group became the core that was somehow able to find a compromise when the national leaders just couldn't.
So what did this group come up with? I mean, what does this bipartisan plan actually look like? Well, their solution wasn't just a single bill. No, it was a pretty clever two-part package, really designed to get both sides to say yes. Okay, the first piece is the foundation of pretty much any shutdown deal, a continuing resolution, or CR for short. You can basically think of this as a temporary patch, right? It doesn't create some big new budget or anything. It just keeps the government funded at the exact same levels for a little while, just to keep things up and running. And this specific CR does three really critical things. First, it funds the government through January 30th, 2026. Second, and this is huge for the workers, it reverses any firings of furloughed employees. And third, it guarantees, absolutely guarantees, that every single one of those furloughed federal employees will get their back pay.
All right, so the second piece of this puzzle is something called a minibus. It sounds a little weird, I know, but it's really just a legislative tactic where lawmakers take a bunch of smaller, less controversial spending bills and they bundle them all up into one bigger package. It just makes it way easier to pass them all at once. So what was actually in this minibus? Well, it was funding for super popular, bipartisan stuff: military construction, the VA, agriculture, and the FDA. And look, this was not random, not at all. Republicans strategically included these things as a sort of sweetener to make the whole deal much, much harder for Democrats to vote against.
Okay, so if the final deal seems to make sense, you might be wondering, what was the 40-day shutdown even about? Well, it all boiled down to one thing: a fundamental, deep disagreement over healthcare.
And this was the logjam. This was the stalemate. For weeks, Democrats were saying, nope, any bill to reopen the government must include an extension for expiring Obamacare subsidies, period. And on the other side, Republicans were just as firm. They were saying, no way. We reopen the government first, and then, maybe, we'll hold a separate vote on the subsidies.
So with both sides completely dug in, how on earth did they finally break the impasse? It really all came down to a big shift in Republican strategy.
Yeah, the Republican leadership, under Senator John Thune, they just decided to change their whole approach. Instead of just daring Democrats to block a simple funding bill, they got clever. They attached that super popular minibus package to it. The thinking was pretty simple. Funding for veterans and for agriculture would be just too politically difficult for moderate Democrats to vote no on.
And you know what? In the end, that strategy worked. Senate Democrats agreed to the deal, which was a real shift from their hardline stance. They ended up accepting a promise from Republican leadership for a future vote on the healthcare subsidies instead of getting it locked into this immediate package.
But even with a deal on the table, don't think for a second that everyone's holding hands and singing Kumbaya. Just listen to this quote from Republican Senator Mark Wayne Mullen. He said, "I don't expect anything from the Democrats. At this point, their demands have been so ridiculous, I don't know what they're going to do, and at this point, I frankly don't give a crap." I mean, wow, that tells you everything you need to know about how low the trust is between the parties. It's a crystal clear sign that even though they found a way to reopen the government, those underlying tensions, they are still very, very real.
So, the deal is struck. Great, but that's not the final step. Not by a long shot. To actually reopen the government, this agreement still has to make its way all the way through Congress.
It's basically a three-step process. Step 1, the full Senate has to pass the package through a series of votes. Step 2, from there, it gets kicked over to the House of Representatives, and they have to approve it too. And then finally, step 3, if it passes both chambers, the bill heads to President Donald Trump's desk to be signed into law. That's the moment the shutdown officially ends.
And that brings us to the big lingering question here. The government is reopening, which is, of course, a huge breakthrough. But that central conflict, the fight over the Obamacare subsidies, it hasn't actually been resolved. It's just been postponed. So I'll leave you with this. Is this a real long-term solution? Or did they just kick the can down the road for another massive fight in the very near future?